It was a cold, winter night, and I found myself alone in my cozy home, savoring the last slice of the apple pie I had baked earlier in the day. The wind howled outside, and the occasional crackling of the fireplace was the only sound in the room. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, giving an otherwise warm and inviting space a hint of mystique. As I savored the warm, cinnamon-infused pie, a sudden knock at the door sent shivers down my spine. I glanced at the clock. It was past 9. Who could be visiting at this hour? My first instinct was to ignore it, hoping that whoever it was would give up and go away. But the knocking continued, persistent and demanding. I sighed, wondering if a neighbor needed assistance or had urgent news to deliver. I reluctantly made my way to the door and peered through the peephole. 2 men stood on my doorstep, both wearing dark coats and hats pulled low. They looked like law enforcement officers, or at least they had the appearance of it. It was not uncommon for the police to make inquiries in the area, and their demeanor seemed serious. As I opened the door, they introduced themselves as detectives, explaining that they were investigating a series of incidents in the neighborhood. They flashed badges quickly, and my unease began to ebb away as they appeared legitimate. They asked politely if they could come inside and asked me a few questions. Feeling a bit flustered by the late-night encounter, I stepped aside and allowed them entry. It seemed like the right thing to do, especially if it would assist in solving whatever was happening in the area. Little did I know how wrong I was. Once inside, the atmosphere grew heavy with tension. Their questioning took on an unsettling intensity, their inquiries becoming more probing than I had anticipated. They asked about my neighbors, their schedules, my daily routine, and if I had seen anything unusual. My sense of unease returned, amplified by their persistent inquiries. The warmth of the fireplace no longer offered comfort. It was as if the flames had dimmed in response to the growing tension in the room. Then, the questions took an even more disconcerting turn. They inquired about my security measures and if I lived alone. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as their eyes bore into me, and it became clear that something was very wrong. As I began to doubt the authenticity of the detectives, I noticed subtle discrepancies in their behavior. Their badges looked a little too polished, and they never seemed to relax, their faces etched with an unyielding seriousness. My unease reached its peak when one of the men, standing uncomfortably close, suggested that I go to the basement to check if everything was secure. Alarm bells rang in my head. Why would they want me to leave the safety of the living room? I managed to muster a weak excuse, stating that I wasn't comfortable leaving my kitchen unattended. Their reaction was chilling, a momentary, angry glint in their eyes before they hastily explained that it was essential for my safety. With my heart pounding, I knew I had to get them out of my home. I insisted on calling the police station to verify their identity. Panic flared in their eyes, and they exchanged a rapid, almost imperceptible signal. It was then that I knew I had to act fast. In a swift move, I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. The operator's voice was a lifeline as I explained the strange situation. The 2 men, realizing they were exposed, lunged for the phone, trying to disconnect the call. A struggle ensued, and the room filled with chaos, my screams mixing with their threats. Thankfully, the police arrived just in time to apprehend the 2 imposters. It turned out that they were not law enforcement officers at all, but criminals attempting to gain entry into my home, with sinister intentions that I could only imagine. The horror of that night stayed with me long after the imposters were taken away in handcuffs. My warm, inviting home had turned into a nightmarish battleground, a reminder that trust should never be granted too easily, even in the most ordinary of moments. The apple pie, which had once been a source of comfort, lay untouched, growing cold on the kitchen table, a silent witness to the chilling encounter that had unfolded in my home that fateful winter night. It was a regular Tuesday night, and I was at home alone, waiting for my brother, Alex, to swing by. He had called me earlier, sounding upset, mentioning that he'd had a bad argument with his wife. I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, and I knew he needed a place to stay for the night. So, I told him to come over, and I'd make up the guest room. The hours crept by, and I sat on the couch, anxiously checking my phone. Alex was usually punctual, but it was getting later, and he hadn't shown up yet. I tried calling him several times, but he didn't answer. My worry began to grow. Around midnight, I decided to go to bed, hoping that he had just been delayed but would show up soon. I left my phone on the nightstand, just in case he called. Sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my mind filled with thoughts of what might have happened. It was around 2 a.m. when I was suddenly jolted awake by a loud, frantic banging on the front door. My heart raced, and I stumbled out of bed, my feet cold on the hardwood floor. I rushed to the door and swung it open to find Alex, his face pale and his clothes disheveled. Breathing heavily, he stumbled into the house and quickly locked the door behind him. He explained in hushed, hurried tones that he had been chased by a group of men. His voice quivered with fear, and his eyes darted nervously to the window. We didn't waste any time. I dialed 911 while Alex recounted what had happened. He told me that after our argument on the phone earlier, he had decided to go for a long drive to clear his head. But as he ventured further from the city, he noticed that a car was tailing him. The men inside the car, total strangers to him, seemed to be pursuing him relentlessly. They drove erratically, and their intent was clear. They wanted to catch him. Fear gnawed at him as he sped along the empty country roads, trying to lose them. But the men were relentless, and they followed him to my house. When he arrived, they pulled up behind his car, blocking him in. That's when he decided to leave his car and flee on foot to reach my house. While I was on the phone with the dispatcher, Alex watched from the window as the men in the car continued to circle the area. He described their vehicle to the operator, who assured us that the police were on their way. As we waited for the authorities to arrive, fear and tension filled the room. We kept the lights off and the curtains drawn, hoping to remain as inconspicuous as possible. The minutes felt like hours as we listened to the ominous sound of the car's engine circling our home. When the police finally arrived, they apprehended the men, who turned out to be involved in a criminal activity. They had been chasing Alex, mistaking him for someone else. The relief that washed over us was overwhelming, knowing that we were safe and the danger had passed. Alex's decision to come to my house that night had saved him from an unknown threat. I remember it was a chilly night when I left my friend's party. I had a bit too much to drink, and the subway was my only way home. As I walked down the dimly lit street, I had that uneasy feeling like someone was following me. My heart started pounding, and I quickened my pace. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a man about a half block away, walking in the same direction. It sent shivers down my spine, but I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. I continued walking, hoping to lose him in the bustling subway. When I reached the station, I nervously bought my ticket and headed for the platform. I looked around, and there he was, the same man, buying his own ticket. My anxiety intensified, but I told myself it was still a possibility that he just needed to catch the same train. I boarded the subway car, and my heart sank as I watched him step onto the same one. He took a seat a few rows away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. I texted my friend to let her know what was happening, just in case. As we neared my stop, I started to panic. I knew I had to get off, but I was terrified that he would follow me. My stop came, and I mustered the courage to exit the subway. I walked quickly up the stairs, my heart racing as I listened for footsteps behind me. Sure enough, when I reached the top of the stairs and looked back, there he was. He had followed me out of the subway, and his presence felt ominous. I picked up my pace, praying I could make it to my apartment building safely. I rushed inside, my trembling hands struggling to unlock the door. I slipped inside, feeling a fleeting moment of relief, but it was short-lived. Just as I closed the door, there was a loud, forceful knock. I jumped in fear, and my heart seemed to stop. Through the peephole, I saw his face, twisted into a sinister grin. He demanded that I open the door, his voice laced with menace. I retreated, grabbing my phone to call the police, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I could hear him pounding on the door, growing more and more frantic. My voice trembled as I spoke to the dispatcher, telling them my address and explaining the terrifying situation. They assured me that officers were on their way. I huddled in the corner of the room, trying to remain as quiet as possible. The pounding on the door continued, and he began to threaten me, promising that he would get in one way or another. Tears streamed down my face as I waited for the police to arrive. Finally, I heard the sirens in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The man outside must have heard them too, because he suddenly stopped his relentless pounding and disappeared into the night. When the police arrived, I explained everything that had happened. They searched the area but couldn't find him. They escorted me to my friend's place, and I stayed there for the night, too terrified to return to my apartment. The chilling encounter haunted me for weeks, making me question my safety and security. I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if the police had arrived just a minute later. It was a nightmare that I would never forget. I had just left a games night at my parents' house and was driving home late at night. The suburban streets were dark and quiet, with only the occasional flicker of a street lamp to break the silence. As I rounded a corner, I saw it. A car pulled over to the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking like desperate cries for help. I decided to do the neighborly thing and pulled over, figuring I could at least offer some assistance. I parked my car behind the stranded vehicle, and when I got out, I noticed a man sitting in the driver's seat. He looked up as I approached, his face etched with a mixture of frustration and fear. "Hey, are you all right?" I called out to him. He turned to me and said, "Just go away. I don't need any help." I hesitated for a moment, thinking that maybe he just wanted to be left alone. But then he shouted again, this time with a note of desperation in his voice. "Wait. I've changed my mind. I do need help. Can you come over here?" I approached cautiously, my heart thumping in my chest. The man seemed frantic, and I couldn't quite make out his features in the dim light. As I got closer, I suddenly felt a chill run down my spine. He had a gun in his hand, and the glint of metal in the darkness sent shivers through me. Panic surged, and I took a step back. "What do you want?" I stammered, my voice trembling. His eyes bore into mine, and he said, "I need your car. Give me your keys, and maybe you'll walk away from this." My mind raced as I considered my options. The situation had gone from being a good Samaritan to a nightmare in the blink of an eye. I could feel the cold, hard surface of my car keys in my pocket, and I knew that I had to make a decision, and quickly. I took a step back, feigning compliance, and then, in one swift motion, I bolted for my car, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I heard the man shout, but I didn't look back. I fumbled for my keys, jumped into my car, and started the engine. As I sped away, I could see the man in my rearview mirror, his figure shrinking into the distance. The fear and shock were still coursing through me, and I knew I had narrowly escaped a horrifying encounter. I drove to the nearest police station, my hands gripping the steering wheel, and recounted the entire ordeal to the officers. They assured me they would investigate and urged me to be cautious on the roads. The events of that night left me with a deep sense of unease, a chilling reminder that danger can lurk in even the most mundane of situations. I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I had hesitated for just a moment longer, if I had made a different choice. It was a night I would never forget, a harrowing encounter that left me shaken and forever changed. It was a routine evening for me, just like any other. I worked for a local homeless charity, and my job involved walking the streets alone, looking for those in need of help. My backpack was filled with sandwiches and blankets, ready to offer some comfort to those who had fallen on hard times. As I turned the corner onto a dimly lit alley, I spotted a man huddled in a makeshift cardboard shelter. He looked like he had seen better days, with tattered clothes and a scruffy beard. I approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Hey there," I said gently. "I've got some food and a warm blanket. Would you like them?" The man stirred and slowly sat up, his eyes filled with weariness. He nodded and accepted the sandwich and blanket, offering a weak but grateful smile. I wished him well and turned to leave, knowing that there were more people in need. But as I took a few steps, I felt a presence behind me. A tall man with a bushy beard and unkempt hair approached me with an unsettling, purposeful stride. He looked at me with piercing eyes, and I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and cold. I introduced myself and explained that I worked for a homeless charity, just trying to help those in need. His response sent a chill through me. "What are you doing here?" "This is my territory," he hissed, his eyes narrowing. I tried to maintain a calm composure and explained that I had no intention of intruding. I simply wanted to provide assistance to the homeless. His demeanor, however, grew increasingly menacing. He moved closer, invading my personal space. The smell of alcohol on his breath was overpowering. "Why don't you give me everything you've got?" he demanded, his hand reaching toward me. My heart raced as I realized that this situation had taken a dangerous turn. I had no choice but to comply, handing over my backpack with the sandwiches and blankets. As he grabbed the bag, he leaned in closer, his face just inches from mine. His eyes bore into me, and his voice turned even colder. "If I see you here again, I won't be so lenient," he whispered, a sinister smile curling on his lips. I nodded, my voice trembling, and watched as he retreated into the darkness, disappearing as mysteriously as he had appeared. Fear coursed through my veins as I stood there, alone and vulnerable. I quickly left the alley and returned to the safety of my car. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, and my heart still pounded from the chilling encounter. I knew I had narrowly escaped a potentially dangerous situation, and it served as a stark reminder of the risks that those working in the field of charity can sometimes face. The memory of that night haunted me, making me question the safety of my job and the unpredictable nature of the human condition. It was a night I would never forget. I was home alone on a quiet night, the only company being the faint hum of the TV in the background. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. I answered, expecting to hear a friend or family member on the other end. But the voice that came through was unfamiliar and chilling. It claimed to be watching me. At first, I laughed it off, thinking it was just a prank call. I'd seen enough horror movies to know how these things went, or so I thought. I told the caller that they wouldn't spook me with their little joke and hung up. I couldn't be bothered by a prank call. It was just a nuisance, or so I believed. A minute passed, and the phone rang again. I hesitated but answered, my amusement fading. This time, the caller described what I was wearing, down to the color of my pajama pants. A cold shiver ran down my spine. This was no ordinary prank. As fear settled in, the phone abruptly went dead. I was left in an eerie silence, my heart pounding in my chest. I began to wonder if I should have taken the call more seriously. Then, the security system in my home blared to life, sending a cacophony of alarms throughout the house. Panic washed over me. I quickly realized that someone was not just watching, they were inside my home. The fear was palpable as I tried to hide in the darkened corner of my living room. My mind raced, and I considered my options. Should I call the police? Should I make a run for it? But I didn't have much time to decide. The intruder stepped into the room, and I could barely make out their silhouette in the dim light. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't see me. My heart seemed to be pounding loud enough to give me away. The stranger moved closer, and their intentions became clear. They were searching for me. I knew I had to act quickly if I wanted to survive. With trembling hands, I reached for my cell phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice on the other end was a lifeline, providing a glimmer of hope. I whispered my address, my voice barely audible, but the intruder heard. They turned toward me, their eyes locked on my hiding place. I held my breath, fearing the worst. The dispatcher was my lifeline, urging me to stay on the line, but I couldn't risk the intruder hearing me. The intruder took a step closer, and I knew it was now or never. I made a break for it, darting through the darkened house with my phone clutched tightly in my hand. The dispatcher's voice grew frantic on the other end. As I reached the front door, the intruder was hot on my heels. I swung the door open, stumbled onto the porch, and saw the flashing lights of a police car approaching. With a final burst of adrenaline, I ran toward the officers who were now rushing toward me, guns drawn. The intruder, realizing they were outmatched, retreated into the shadows. The police searched the area, but the intruder had disappeared. I was left shaken, traumatized by the chilling encounter. The sense of violation in my own home would haunt me for years to come. The investigation would continue, but the intruder remained elusive. My home was no longer a sanctuary, and the night would always be a reminder of the horrifying ordeal. I used to love going out at night, setting up my camera and capturing the beauty of the stars. I'm an astrophotographer, and I've spent countless hours under the night sky. But one night, I had an encounter that still sends shivers down my spine. I was in a remote location, far away from city lights, where the stars shone their brightest. As I was adjusting my camera and taking long exposure shots, I noticed a strange glow on the horizon. It wasn't the soft light of a distant town, it was something different. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I packed up my gear and started walking toward the source of the glow. The night was silent, and a chill hung in the air. The closer I got, the more the light seemed to flicker, like firelight dancing in the dark. It wasn't until I reached a small clearing that I understood what I was seeing. There were two men huddled around a bonfire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. They appeared to be in their late 40s, and their unkempt appearance sent a shiver down my spine. They didn't look like they belonged there. As I approached, I tried to strike up a conversation, asking if they needed any help. But their response was chilling. They looked at me with cold, empty eyes and said nothing. It was as if they hadn't even heard me. Feeling uneasy, I decided to back away slowly and continue my journey. But as I turned to leave, one of the men stood up, his movement eerily slow and deliberate. He began to follow me, and a sense of dread washed over me. I quickened my pace, my heart racing as I walked through the dark forest. I could hear the man's footsteps getting closer, his heavy breathing echoing through the night. The fear gnawed at me, and I knew I needed to get away. As I broke into a run, I could hear the man's footsteps pounding behind me. Panic surged through me as I raced through the woods, my breaths coming in rapid gasps. I had never been so afraid in my life. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling. I could hear the man getting closer, his footsteps drawing near. I managed to unlock the car just in time, throwing myself inside and locking the doors. The man pounded on the windows, his face contorted in anger. I couldn't make out his words, but his expression sent a clear message. He wanted something, and I didn't want to find out what it was. I started the car and peeled out of there, leaving the strange men behind. My heart still pounded, and fear clung to me like a heavy weight. I didn't stop until I was safely back in town. That chilling encounter haunted me for weeks, making me question my love for astrophotography. I was at home, just trying to unwind and enjoy a movie on a quiet evening. The only company I had was the soft glow of the TV, and everything seemed peaceful. That is, until it all went horribly wrong. In the middle of a tense scene in the movie, I heard an enormous crash from the living room. My heart leaped into my throat as I jumped up and rushed to see what had happened. To my horror, I found that a brick had been thrown through my window, shattering glass everywhere. As I stood there, bewildered and panicked, I heard footsteps running away from my house. I didn't think twice. Adrenaline surged through my veins, and I took off after the intruder. I didn't even take a moment to consider the risks. I sprinted down the street, and that's when I saw him. A man, dressed strangely and looking disheveled, was running away from my house. I caught up to him, my anger overpowering my fear. "Why did you do that?" I shouted at him, out of breath but determined to get answers. He turned to face me, and there was something unsettling in his eyes. It was a mix of anger, fear, and something else that I couldn't quite place. He stammered, I had to send a warning. This is just the beginning." Confusion swirled within me. What warning? What was he talking about? It was clear that he had the wrong person, yet he seemed convinced of his actions. I couldn't reason with him. Instead, he lashed out, and a fight erupted between us. His blows were fierce, and I struggled to defend myself. I managed to land a few hits, but he was relentless, and I found myself overpowered. In the midst of our struggle, I heard sirens approaching. The police had been called, and this chaotic encounter was about to come to an end. It was a relief to see the flashing lights, and the man, realizing he was about to be caught, made a desperate attempt to escape. He pushed me aside and sprinted away. The police arrived just in time to see him disappear into the darkness, but they wasted no time in pursuing him. It didn't take long for them to apprehend the man. It was then that I learned the shocking truth: he had the wrong house. It turned out that this stranger had some personal vendetta against another individual, and in his misguided attempt to send a warning, he had targeted the wrong home. The relief of knowing it was a case of mistaken identity was tempered by the pain of my injuries. As I sat there, nursing my wounds and watching the police put the man into the back of a cruiser, I couldn't help but feel the weight of that night's terrifying encounter. I used to be a late-night radio host, spinning tunes and chatting with insomniacs who tuned in during the darkest hours. The studio was my sanctuary, a place of solitude, where the world outside seemed distant and the city lights dimmed. But one night, as I was spinning records and sharing stories, an encounter occurred that sent chills down my spine. The clock on the wall was edging toward 3 a.m. when I heard a faint but persistent knocking on the studio door. It was unusual for anyone to visit at this hour, especially in the middle of a live broadcast. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to see who it was. I approached the door cautiously, peering through the small window. In the dim light of the hallway, I saw a figure, a man, standing there, his face obscured by the shadows. The strange thing was, I hadn't noticed anyone entering the building. It was as though he had materialized out of thin air. I hesitated, unsure whether to open the door, but the knocking persisted. I decided to take a deep breath and unlock it, pulling it open just a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice wavering. The man stepped into the light of the studio, and I got my first good look at him. He was odd, to say the least. His clothes were tattered, and his face bore a haggard expression. It was clear that he hadn't seen a shower or a shave in weeks. "Please," he said, his voice quivering, "I need your help." I couldn't deny the desperation in his eyes, and so I reluctantly allowed him to enter the studio. He began to tell a bizarre and unsettling story, something about a government conspiracy, hidden messages in the radio waves. It was incoherent, and his words were laced with paranoia. As he spoke, a crowing unease washed over me. It was clear that he was not in his right mind, and the stories he told were becoming more and more delusional. The man's presence felt suffocating, and I realized that I had made a grave mistake in letting him in. I tried to change the subject, to bring the conversation back to reality, but he became increasingly agitated. His eyes darted around the studio, and his voice grew louder and more unhinged. And then, without warning, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife, holding it menacingly in front of him. Fear clamped down on my chest, and I knew I had to act quickly. I lunged for the phone and dialed 911, praying that help would arrive in time. The man, realizing what I had done, became more frantic, waving the knife in my direction. He shouted unintelligibly, and the situation grew increasingly volatile. Thankfully, the police arrived in the nick of time. The man was subdued, and I was left shaken but unharmed. As they led him away, I couldn't help but feel the lingering terror of that chilling encounter. It was a night I would never forget. I was alone, sitting by the quiet lake, hoping to catch a few fish under the blanket of the night sky. The world around me was serene, the water reflecting the shimmering stars, and the only sound was the soft lapping of the waves against the shore. It was the perfect place to escape the daily grind and find some peace. As the hours passed, the cool breeze made me shiver, and I began to feel a bit unnerved. The isolation of the lake at night started to play tricks on my mind, but I brushed it off as mere imagination. Then, I heard it. Faint at first, a distant rustling in the trees that surrounded the lake. My heart quickened, and I strained my ears to listen. The rustling was growing louder, and soon I could hear the heavy, erratic footsteps of someone approaching. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out the silhouette of the intruder. It was a man, disheveled and wild-looking, stumbling out of the woods and onto the shore. His presence was unsettling, and I knew I had reason to be wary. "Hey," I called out, my voice shaky. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" The man turned to face me, his eyes wide and manic. His clothes were tattered, and his beard was overgrown. He didn't respond to my questions, but continued to advance toward me. Panic surged through me, and I quickly reeled in my fishing line and began to back away from the shore. The man's approach was relentless, and it was clear that he was not in a sound state of mind. "What do you want?" I yelled, desperation creeping into my voice. He finally spoke, his words disjointed and filled with a strange intensity. He rambled on about government conspiracies and hidden secrets, making no sense at all. The madness in his eyes was unmistakable, and I knew I was in danger. With every step he took, my heart pounded harder, and my mind raced for a way out of this nightmare. The lake offered no escape, and the dense forest blocked any path to safety. In a moment of sheer terror, the man lunged at me, and I barely had time to react. We grappled, each of us fighting for control, but he had a frenzied strength that I couldn't match. The struggle was chaotic, and I felt his hands closing around my throat. I fought to break free, desperation coursing through my veins. In one last, desperate move, I managed to break away from his grip, staggering backward and gasping for air. The man, sensing that I was slipping away from his grasp, began to scream wildly, his words incoherent and filled with anger. He continued to advance, but his erratic behavior allowed me the chance to sprint away from him into the woods. The dark forest swallowed me, and I ran through the thicket, branches scraping at my skin. I knew I needed to find help, to escape this madman who had descended upon the serene lake. I ran for what felt like hours, but the woods seemed never-ending. It was only when I finally stumbled upon a nearby road that I saw the welcoming lights of a passing car. I flagged it down, and the driver called the police, who responded quickly. They apprehended the man, who had continued to rant and rave, even in their custody. It turned out he had escaped from a nearby mental institution, and his chilling encounter with me was only one chapter in a nightmarish escape. It was a cold, dark night. I stood alone at the dimly lit bus stop, waiting to embark on another dreaded night shift. The silence of the deserted street weighed heavily on my shoulders as I watched the minutes tick by. I was used to the eerie solitude of these pre-dawn hours, but this night would be different. As I checked the time on my phone, a car slowly pulled up beside me, its engine idling ominously. The driver's side window rolled down, revealing a chilling sight, a man wearing a grotesque mask. My heart began to race, and I took a step back, clutching my bag tightly. The masked man stared at me with a malevolent intensity, and I could feel a shiver crawl down my spine. He leaned over, his voice distorted through the mask, and he uttered a sinister threat that sent a jolt of fear through me. "I'll give you 30 seconds, he hissed, brandishing a gleaming knife. "Start running." My instincts took over, and without a second thought, I turned and sprinted down the desolate street, my heart pounding like a drum. The chilling realization that my life was on the line raced alongside me. I could hear the car's engine roar to life, and I knew he was right behind me. I darted down alleys and side streets, hoping to shake my pursuer. The sound of the car's engine grew closer, and my fear intensified. Panic welled up inside me, and I needed to escape this living nightmare. As I ran, I noticed a line of garden fences that stretched along a row of houses. It was a desperate gamble, but I had no other choice. I leaped onto the first fence, using all my strength to scramble over it. My heart felt like it would burst, and I knew I couldn't afford to look back. The masked man's car screeched to a halt just as I reached the next fence. My fingers fumbled with the wooden slats, and I could hear him yelling, his voice a haunting mix of anger and menace. I managed to clamber over the fence just as he burst out of his car, knife glinting in the pale moonlight. I heard him cursing, his footsteps coming closer. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, and I kept running, praying that I had created enough distance. Over the course of what felt like an eternity, I climbed more fences, darted through backyards, and scrambled through narrow passageways. The masked man pursued me relentlessly, never giving up. He was fueled by a sinister determination that seemed impossible to shake. My lungs burned, and my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. The stakes were too high. I had to survive this chilling encounter. The masked man was relentless, his threats echoing through the night as he pursued me relentlessly. Finally, I found myself on a more crowded street, the distant sounds of passing cars providing a glimmer of hope. I flagged down a passing vehicle, desperate for help. The driver's kind eyes met mine, and I could see the relief wash over his face as he realized the gravity of the situation. As I jumped into the vehicle, I urged the driver to speed away. I could still see the masked man in my rearview mirror, standing on the dark street, his malevolent gaze fixed on me. It was a scene that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. The police were called, and they searched for the masked man, but he had vanished into the shadows, leaving me with the chilling memory of that horrifying encounter. I couldn't help but wonder what had motivated him to terrorize me that night, and the fear that it could happen again never truly left me. The night shift was the least of my worries as I grappled with the trauma of what had unfolded on that dark, desolate street. The world could be a terrifying place, and I had come face to face with a nightmare that would forever play on my mind. It was a typical gloomy night, and I found myself alone at the local convenience store, working the dreaded graveyard shift. Usually, there were two of us manning the store during these late hours, but tonight, the other worker Toby had called in sick. I couldn't help but feel a shiver of unease as I gazed out at the deserted streets. The minutes dragged by, and the store was eerily quiet. I tried to stay occupied, tidying up the shelves and counting inventory, but the isolation weighed heavily on me. The dim, flickering fluorescent lights did little to dispel the gloom that settled around me. Around 1 in the morning, just when I was beginning to feel the full weight of loneliness, the doorbell chimed, signaling the arrival of a group of men. They were rugged, with unkempt appearances and a collective air of menace. My heart quickened, but I greeted them with the practiced smile I had perfected over countless late-night shifts. The men paid me no mind as they wandered the aisles, their eyes shifting furtively. I couldn't help but notice their hushed conversations and lingering glances in my direction. Anxiety coursed through me, but I couldn't put my finger on why they had me on edge. As they approached the counter with their chosen items, a sense of dread washed over me. They seemed agitated, their movements jerky and unpredictable. I swallowed hard, trying to appear calm and composed, but I knew something wasn't right. One of the men leaned in closer, his voice a low, menacing growl. "You're alone here, aren't you?" I nodded hesitantly, a lump forming in my throat. I watched in apprehension as the men exchanged knowing glances, a malicious spark in their eyes. They were in no hurry to complete their purchases, and their presence felt like an ominous shadow that had fallen over the store. As they lingered at the counter, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. The leader of the group, a burly man with a scruffy beard, leaned even closer, his words dripping with menace. "You know, it's not safe to be all alone like this. Bad things can happen." My heart raced as the full gravity of the situation began to sink in. These men weren't here for snacks or drinks, they were here for something else. My instinct screamed at me to remain calm, to stall, and to find a way out of this chilling encounter. I pretended to fumble with the register, hoping that the arrival of another customer might deter the men. But the minutes ticked by, and the store remained empty, save for the menacing intruders. One of the men reached across the counter, his fingers inching closer to me, and a guttural voice filled with malice whispered, "We could have a little fun with you, you know." Panic surged through me, and my mind raced for a way out. I needed help, and I needed it fast. My hand darted beneath the counter, frantically pressing the silent alarm button. But the men saw my actions and realized that I had summoned help. Anger flashed across their faces, and the leader grabbed my arm with a vice-like grip, his face contorted with rage. "You think you can call for help? Not so fast, buddy." The bell above the door jingled, and the police arrived just in time, the flashing lights casting an otherworldly glow over the scene. The men were apprehended, their sinister intentions thwarted. As the police took the men away, I couldn't help but shudder. I had narrowly escaped a nightmare, a chilling encounter that would haunt my thoughts for years to come. I'd been delivering newspapers in the early hours for as long as I could remember, and the solitude was something I'd grown used to. But on this particular shift, the world around me would change in a way I never expected. The dim glow of streetlights cast long, eerie shadows as I walked my usual route. Most mornings, I had a companion, but today, I was alone. The solitude was palpable, and a sense of unease settled over me. I kept telling myself it was just another day, that nothing unusual would happen. As I approached an intersection, I saw a figure up ahead. It was a man, riding an electric bike down the deserted street. He appeared out of nowhere, his movements oddly smooth in the stillness of the night. My instincts bristled, but I tried to shake off the unease. The man pedaled closer, and I could make out the faint hum of the electric bike. He wore a hood that concealed most of his face, and his presence felt strangely out of place. I couldn't help but wonder what he was doing out here in the early morning hours. As he drew nearer, he slowed down, matching my pace. His eyes, barely visible beneath the hood, fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. My heart began to race, and I quickened my steps, trying to put some distance between us. But he didn't back off. Instead, he kept riding alongside me, never uttering a word. The silence was deafening, and I could feel a growing sense of dread creep over me. I had no idea what this man wanted or why he was fixated on me. I tried to switch my route, veering onto a different street, but the man followed, his electric bike moving effortlessly. I couldn't escape him, and my heart pounded as I realized I was trapped in this chilling encounter. The streets were still empty, and the occasional car that passed by paid no attention to the bizarre situation unfolding on the sidewalk. I was on my own, with no one to turn to for help. As I reached the end of my route, I hurried to deliver the last few newspapers and then dashed into a nearby convenience store, desperate for safety. The bell above the store's door jingled as I entered, and the man on the electric bike lingered outside, watching me through the window. The store's owner, a middle-aged woman, noticed my distress and asked if I was all right. I explained the unsettling encounter I just had with the man on the electric bike, and she immediately called the police. The man outside realized he had been noticed and quickly pedaled away, disappearing into the quiet night. The police arrived shortly after, but the man was long gone. The encounter haunted me for days, leaving me with an unshakable feeling of vulnerability. I couldn't understand the man's intentions or why he had targeted me. The solitary early morning shift had taken on a new level of terror. It was a warm, muggy night, and I found myself seeking refuge from the oppressive heat in the tranquility of my backyard. The late hour had cast a hush over the neighborhood, and the only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. The pool shimmered invitingly under the moonlight, its surface mirroring the stars above. I couldn't resist the temptation any longer. It was the perfect night for a late-night swim. I slipped into my bathing suit and made my way to the pool. The water felt refreshingly cool against my skin as I waded in, each stroke washing away the stresses of the day. The solitude was comforting, and I reveled in the peacefulness of the night. As I swam, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. I stopped and turned, my heart skipping a beat as I saw a figure standing at the edge of my house. It was him, the local neighborhood weirdo, a man who had always seemed just a bit off, but never dangerous. He stared at me with a strange intensity, his presence in my backyard sending a chill down my spine. I couldn't help but wonder what he was doing here at this hour, watching me with an unsettling fixation. Tentatively, I called out, asking if he needed something. He didn't respond at first, just continued to gaze at me with a vacant look in his eyes. My unease grew, and I began to swim toward the pool's edge, ready to retreat to the safety of my house. But he moved closer, his voice trembling as he finally spoke. He asked me strange, nonsensical questions, his words disjointed and bizarre. I struggled to make sense of what he was saying, his ramblings making no sense at all. And then, his tone shifted, and he confessed his love for me. The words were a shocking revelation, and I could feel my pulse quicken with fear. I had never even spoken to this man, let alone given him any reason to feel such an intense, irrational affection. I told him firmly that he needed to leave, that his presence was unwelcome and his words were making me uncomfortable. But he didn't budge, and his obsession seemed to intensify. He moved closer still, his movements erratic and unpredictable. I could see a dangerous glint in his eyes, and my instinct screamed at me to get away from him. As he reached out to touch me, I swam away, scrambling to put distance between us. The night had taken a nightmarish turn, and I felt trapped in my own backyard with this stranger who had become an unsettling stalker. I knew I had to get inside, but the man's presence made me hesitant to turn my back on him. With trembling legs, I finally made my way to the pool's edge and clambered out. The man followed, his obsession unabated. As I raced to the safety of my house, I could hear his unsettling whispers and pleas behind me. I locked the door and called the police, the sound of sirens approaching bringing a wave of relief. The man was taken into custody, but the nightmare of that night would stay with me. It was a moonless night, and I was on my usual security patrol at the zoo. My footsteps echoed through the empty pathways, and the only sounds were the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. It was peaceful, and I felt like I had the whole place to myself. But that sense of solitude would soon turn into a chilling encounter. As I rounded a corner, I saw a man standing near the zoo's perimeter fence. He looked out of place, dressed in ragged clothing, and his presence immediately put me on edge. I approached him cautiously, wondering how he had gotten inside the restricted area. He turned to face me, and in the dim light, I could see that his eyes were vacant, devoid of any emotion. I asked him what he was doing there, but he didn't respond. He just stared at me with an unsettling intensity. I tried to maintain my composure, explaining that this was a restricted area and he needed to leave. But he remained silent, and his gaze never wavered from me. The tension in the air grew thicker, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I was about to radio for backup when the man finally spoke. His words were disjointed and incoherent, like he was speaking in riddles. I struggled to make sense of what he was saying, but it was as if he was in the grip of some kind of madness. Then, his tone shifted, and he started asking me personal questions, my name, where I lived, and other details that sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't answer, but his relentless questioning continued. As I tried to back away, the man moved closer, his erratic behavior becoming increasingly alarming. He began to mutter threats and strange, cryptic phrases that made no sense. The situation was spiraling out of control, and I knew I needed to call for help. But the man's behavior took a terrifying turn. He lunged toward me, and I stumbled backward. He was faster than I expected, and I could see a glint of something sharp in his hand. I realized he was armed, and panic surged through me. I drew my radio, urgently calling for backup as I tried to create distance between us. The man continued to advance, his wild eyes fixed on me. I was trapped in a terrifying standoff, the darkness of the zoo amplifying the horror of the situation. Just as it seemed he was about to close in on me, the distant sound of approaching sirens grew louder. Backup was on its way, and the man must have heard it too. His demeanor shifted again, and he suddenly turned and disappeared into the night, vanishing into the darkness of the zoo. When my fellow security guards arrived, we conducted a thorough search of the area, but the man was long gone. The encounter left me shaken, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a nightmare. The incident remained a mystery, but the encounter with that man would haunt my dreams for years to come. The safety and serenity of the zoo had been shattered that night, and I would always wonder who he was and what his intentions had been. It was a regular Tuesday evening, and I found myself attending a night class at the local community college. The class was about as exciting as you'd expect a night class to be, and I had seen my fair share of students come and go. But that evening, there was a new face among us. He was a quiet, unassuming guy, and he stood up mainly because I hadn't seen him around before. His demeanor was a bit odd, though. He kept to himself, rarely made eye contact, and never participated in the class discussions. Still, I thought little of it and focused on my notes. Once the class ended, I gathered my things and headed out the door. I noticed the new guy doing the same. As I walked toward my car, I couldn't help but feel his presence lingering behind me. At first, I brushed it off as a coincidence, but the sensation of being followed was hard to shake. I decided to test my theory. I took a few unexpected turns, but he stayed with me. Unease began to creep in, and I finally stopped in my tracks and turned to face him. "Hey, why are you following me?" I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting around as if searching for the right words. Then, he simply said, "I need to talk to you." I was taken aback by his response. "Talk to me about what?" I asked. He took a step closer, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. "It's important. Please, just listen to me." Despite the nagging feeling that something was off, I decided to hear him out. He started to tell a strange tale, something about a conspiracy and a hidden truth that only a few were aware of. His words were erratic, and it was hard to follow his train of thought. As I tried to make sense of what he was saying, he suddenly reached into his backpack and pulled out a stack of papers. They were filled with scribbled notes, diagrams, and what appeared to be newspaper clippings. He thrust the papers toward me, urging me to read them. I took a step back, growing increasingly uneasy. The situation had taken a bizarre turn, and I had no idea what to make of it. My instinct screamed at me to get away from this guy. I mumbled an excuse about needing to go, turned, and started to walk away. But as I did, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength, his grip like a vice. "I need your help. You have to believe me," he pleaded, his voice trembling. Panic set in, and I wrenched my arm free, leaving him behind. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest as I made my way to the car. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the fear that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The encounter with that new student had been anything but ordinary, and his desperation had been palpable. I couldn't help but wonder what secrets he had been so eager to share. The whole experience left me shaken and wary of strangers. It was a chilling reminder that the world is full of mysteries, and sometimes they're not the kind you want to uncover. That night, I couldn't help but feel like I had narrowly escaped something that could have turned into a true nightmare. I had settled in for a cozy night at home, the prospect of Chinese takeout being the highlight of my evening. My husband was away on business, and I relished the chance to have some much-needed alone time. The rain tapped lightly against the windows. It was the perfect evening home alone. I phoned my local Chinese and placed an order, then sunk into the couch waiting for it to arrive. After what felt like an eternity, the doorbell finally rang. I was more than ready to dig into my dinner. I opened the door, thanking the delivery man with a smile as he handed over my food. But as I closed the door, something caught my eye. He was lingering on my porch, peering through the window. I thought it was odd, but didn't dwell on it too much. Maybe he was just checking that he delivered the right order. I walked into the kitchen, placed the bag on the counter, and began to unpack my meal. As I settled at the table, I glanced out the window and froze. The delivery man was still there, staring through the glass. Our eyes met, and an uneasy chill swept over me. I hurriedly closed the blinds, my heart racing. Minutes passed, and I convinced myself that it was a mere coincidence. Maybe he had some reason to be on my porch, and I was overthinking it. But then, the doorbell rang again. It was him, back at the door. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do. I decided to crack the door open slightly, a polite smile hiding my growing unease. He mumbled something about needing to check the order, but it sounded like a weak excuse. My instincts told me not to let him in, and I firmly refused, explaining that I had everything I needed. He nodded, but there was something off about his demeanor. He didn't move, just stood there, staring at me with a vacant expression. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, I closed the door and locked it. I rushed to the living room, my anxiety spiking. As I sat there, I heard shuffling outside my window. Peeking through the blinds, my blood ran cold. He was still there, staring at me, and this time his expression was unsettling. He seemed almost hollow, like he was devoid of emotion. Panic surged through me, and I immediately dialed 911, explaining the bizarre and unnerving situation. The dispatcher assured me that an officer was on the way, and I felt a momentary relief. But that relief was short-lived. I heard the unmistakable sound of my front door knob being jiggled. My heart was pounding as I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. I could hear footsteps inside my home, growing closer. Then, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from my husband, checking in on me. I quickly messaged back, telling him I was in danger and calling the police. He replied with urgent concern, urging me to stay safe. Finally, I heard the wailing sirens of a police car approaching. The intruder must have heard them too because, just as the officers burst through my front door, the sound of footsteps retreating into the night echoed through the house. The police searched the area, but the delivery man was gone. I was left shaken, traumatized by the chilling encounter. The safety of my own home had been violated, and the incident would forever haunt my nights alone. I decided to spend a night camping in the woods, seeking solitude and a break from the noise of everyday life. As I set up my campsite, my only companions were the chirping crickets and the crackling campfire. But as the night grew darker, a sense of unease crept over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, a result of the isolation, but a twig snapped nearby. My heart raced. I strained my ears, and there it was again, the sound of footsteps, not too far from my camp. Panic set in, and I grabbed my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. What I saw froze me in my tracks. A group of men, their faces obscured by the shadows, were standing just beyond the edge of my campfire's glow. My mind raced with questions. Were they lost? In trouble? But their silence and the tension in the air sent shivers down my spine. I mustered the courage to speak, my voice trembling, asking if they needed help. One of them stepped forward, a vague silhouette in the darkness, and said nothing. The only sound was the crackling of the fire, and their unsettling presence weighed heavy on my chest. I decided it was time to pack up and leave, to retreat into the safety of my car. As I began to disassemble my camp, I couldn't help but glance in their direction. They remained motionless, their silence unbroken. Suddenly, one of them took a step closer to the firelight, revealing a grim, emotionless face. He raised his hand, and in it was a knife, its blade glinting menacingly in the fire's glow. Fear surged through me, and I grabbed my backpack, leaving my tent and campfire behind. I began to back away from the chilling figures, their presence growing more malevolent. The man with the knife approached me slowly, and his cohorts closed in from all sides, encircling me. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the danger I was in. Desperation drove me to turn and run, crashing through the underbrush and into the blackness of the forest. My flashlight's beam illuminated my path, but the sound of their pursuit was relentless. I couldn't escape the feeling that they were getting closer with every step. As I ran, the woods seemed to close in around me, the trees becoming a maze of shadows and nightmares. I didn't dare look back, fearing what I might see. The sound of their footsteps echoed in my ears, the darkness offering them an advantage. And then, a sharp pain seared through my side, and I stumbled, collapsing to the ground. They had caught up to me, and the man with the knife had struck. I fought to my feet, my blood pounding in my ears, and continued to flee, driven by sheer survival instinct. Hours passed, and I finally emerged from the woods, my breath ragged, and my body battered. I had lost them, but the terror of that chilling encounter would forever haunt my nights. I couldn't explain their intentions or why they had chosen me, but I knew that in the depths of those woods, I had narrowly escaped a nightmare beyond imagination. I was having a typical night at home, engrossed in my PlayStation 5, trying to escape into virtual worlds and forget about the stresses of the day. It was just me, alone in my apartment, or so I thought. Then it happened. A loud crash echoed from the direction of the kitchen, snapping me out of my digital reverie. I paused the game, the eerie silence that followed only adding to the dread that was beginning to creep over me. My heart quickened its pace as I slowly got up and made my way to the kitchen, guided by the dim glow of the hallway light. As I reached the kitchen, I noticed something was off. The window, which I distinctly remembered closing earlier, was wide open. Panic coursed through my veins. I knew I had shut it. There was no doubt in my mind. My senses heightened as I began to scrutinize the room. The open window had let in a chilly breeze, and the curtains rustled softly in response. But the eeriest part was the absolute silence. I strained my ears, hoping to hear the familiar creaks of my old building, the hum of the refrigerator, anything to reassure me that I was alone. That's when I heard it, a barely perceptible sound, a soft, labored breath coming from behind the kitchen island. I froze. My racing heart drowned out the digital symphony from the game console, and my mind raced. Who could be in my apartment? What did they want? With bated breath, I edged toward the kitchen island, my fingers gripping the edge. As I peered around it, I met eyes that weren't mine, eyes that glistened with malice. A stranger was crouched there, hidden in the shadows, watching me with a sinister grin. Fear constricted my chest as I stumbled back, my heart pounding louder than ever. I knew I had to do something, but panic held me in its grip. The intruder slowly rose to his feet, revealing himself to be a man I had never seen before. He looked disheveled, wild, and his presence sent shivers down my spine. "What are you doing here?" I stammered, trying to sound tough, but my voice betrayed my fear. The intruder's grin widened as he stepped toward me. "I just wanted to play a little game," he hissed. In that moment, I had no choice but to flee. I darted out of the kitchen and toward the front door, my racing heart urging me to escape this nightmare. I didn't look back, but I could hear him close behind me, his menacing laughter echoing through the apartment. I burst out of the front door and into the safety of the hallway, gasping for breath. I called the police, and they arrived within minutes, but the intruder was long gone. They searched the building, but there was no trace of him. As I stood there, trembling and shaken, I couldn't help but wonder how he had gotten in, why he had chosen my apartment, and what sinister intentions he had harbored. I was on the night shift, trucking down a desolate stretch of road up north. I had a load to deliver, and that meant hours on the road with nothing but my thoughts. Finally, I reached my destination and dropped off the load without a hitch. With the job done, I decided to park up at the side of the road for some much-needed rest before the long drive back the next day. The cab of my truck offered me a cramped but familiar space to sleep in, and I soon succumbed to fatigue. I was deep in the embrace of a restless slumber when I heard a sharp, insistent knock on the window. My eyes shot open, and I sat up, disoriented and trembling. The night had grown even darker, and my surroundings seemed otherworldly. The glow of the dashboard provided the only source of light, casting eerie shadows across the interior of the cab. My first thought was that it was just a figment of my imagination, a dream that had spilled over into my waking hours. But then, it came again, that persistent, unsettling knocking. My heart began to race, and I tried to gather my thoughts. Who could possibly be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? Carefully, I peered out of the window, my breath misting up the glass. The moon was obscured by heavy clouds, leaving me with nothing but darkness to confront. I strained my eyes, trying to see past the inky abyss that stretched before me. And then I saw it. A shape, a shadow, just beyond the reach of my headlights. My stomach clenched, and I quickly reached for the ignition, ready to light up the night and reveal the source of the knocking. As the beams of light pierced the darkness, I was met with a sight that sent shivers down my spine. A figure, a man, stood there, cloaked in tattered, dirt-stained clothes. His face was hidden beneath the hood of a grimy jacket, but his eyes were fixed on mine, cold and lifeless. The knocking continued, more urgent now, as if he were demanding my attention. My mind raced, and I couldn't comprehend how this man had come to be in the middle of nowhere, miles away from civilization, in the dead of night. With a sense of dread, I cracked the window just slightly, enough to hear his raspy voice. "You'll let me in, won't you?" he croaked. I didn't know what to do. Fear held me in its grip, and I was paralyzed by the uncertainty of the situation. How had he found me, and what did he want? I considered driving away, but something in his eyes told me that wouldn't be so easy. In the end, I made a decision that still haunts me to this day. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door, and he climbed inside. The odor of decay and dirt clung to him, and his presence sent shivers through my body. As he settled into the passenger seat, his hood fell back, revealing a face that looked as though it had been carved from stone. His eyes, pale and devoid of emotion, stared straight ahead. I couldn't find my voice to ask him any questions. Instead, I kept driving, the eerie silence of the night broken only by the sound of his labored breathing. I didn't know where I was going, or what fate awaited me at the end of that dark road. All I knew was that I had been thrust into a chilling encounter, and there was no escaping it. The night stretched on, and the world beyond the headlights remained hidden, just as the man's intentions remained shrouded in uncertainty. It had been a long and busy night at the bar. The crowd had come and gone, laughter and clinking glasses had filled the air, but now it was time to close up and head home. I was ready to lock the doors, clean up, and put another successful day behind me. As I wiped down the bar and put away the bottles, I heard the soft jingle of the doorbell. I glanced at the clock, almost 2 a.m. I hadn't expected anyone to walk in at this hour, but there he was, a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. He looked disheveled, like he'd been wandering the streets for a while. I gave him a friendly but tired smile and said, "Sorry, we're closed for the night. You'll have to come back tomorrow." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he continued to stand there, just inside the doorway, studying me with a cold and unsettling intensity. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I chalked it up to the late hour and maybe a few too many drinks. The man finally broke his silence with a voice that was low and gruff. "I didn't come here for a drink." My unease deepened. I didn't know what to make of his cryptic statement, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I glanced at the baseball bat I kept beneath the bar, just in case. With caution in my voice, I said, "All right, but we're closed now. You'll have to go." He didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on me, and the air in the room grew heavier with each passing second. The silence was almost suffocating. Finally, he took a step closer. His clothes were ragged, and his scent was a mix of sweat and something more foul. It was then that I noticed a strange glint in his eye, a glint that made my blood run cold. He leaned in closer, his breath hot and heavy, and whispered words that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're going to help me." My heart raced, and I took a step back, bumping into the bar. Panic surged through me as I realized that something was terribly wrong with this man. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, and I was trapped, alone with a stranger who was anything but ordinary. In my desperation, I reached for the baseball bat, gripping it tightly. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I also couldn't allow this man to harm me. I demanded to know what he wanted, but his response sent chills through my body. "I've been watching you, and you're the one. You'll help me, whether you want to or not." His words made no sense, and my fear escalated. I edged toward the phone behind the bar, ready to call the police. But before I could reach it, he lunged at me with a speed that defied his disheveled appearance. In the struggle that followed, adrenaline and sheer terror gave me the strength to fight back. The baseball bat became a lifeline, and I managed to land a blow that sent him staggering backward. It bought me just enough time to grab the phone and dial 911. As I relayed my desperate plea for help to the operator, I could hear the stranger regaining his composure. He was coming at me again, and I realized that my life depended on whether the police could arrive in time. Seconds felt like hours as I fought to keep the intruder at bay. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in a nightmare from which I might never wake. The stranger's chilling words kept echoing in my mind, "You'll help me, whether you want to or not." And the true horror was that I had no idea what kind of help he needed or what he was capable of. In those terrifying moments, the bar that had been my haven became a battleground. It was a fight for my life against a man who had invaded my world with darkness and uncertainty. And as I continued to fend him off, all I could do was pray that the police would arrive in time to end this nightmarish encounter. It was a dark and stormy night, the rain pounding on my windows like 1,000 desperate fists. I was alone in my small, dimly lit apartment, wrapped in a cozy blanket and trying to find solace in the glow of my laptop. Outside, the world was swallowed by shadows, and the only sound was the relentless rain. I wasn't a fan of thunderstorms, and this one was particularly fierce. As I distracted myself with a movie, the room was intermittently plunged into darkness by the erratic lightning. I had no plans to venture outside, but something felt off that night. In one of those brief flashes of lightning, I thought I saw movement outside my window. I paused the movie, my heart racing, and strained my eyes to see through the rain-smeared glass. But there was nothing there, just the rain and the inky blackness beyond. Dismissing it as a trick of the storm, I resumed the movie and tried to lose myself in the plot. Yet, an uneasy feeling gnawed at me. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, and the nearest tree branches were too far away to cause any movement. There was no logical reason for anything to be outside my window. Minutes passed, and my fear only grew. Every flash of lightning felt like a countdown to some impending horror. It was then that I heard a faint scratching noise coming from the window. The slow, deliberate sound of something or someone scraping at the glass. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned to face the window. There, illuminated by the next flash of lightning, was a face pressed against the glass, twisted into a grotesque grin. It was a stranger, a man who couldn't have possibly been standing on my narrow windowsill. His eyes met mine with an unsettling mix of menace and glee. A scream erupted from my throat, and I stumbled backward, knocking over my laptop. The room went dark as the movie flickered out. Panic coursed through my veins, and I fumbled for my phone, desperately dialing 911. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the window, fearing that he would break the glass and enter at any moment. The dispatcher's voice on the other end was the lifeline I needed. I explained my situation, my voice trembling, and she assured me that help was on the way. I stayed on the line, praying that the police would arrive in time. The scratching at the window continued, and the man's sinister grin never wavered. He began to speak, his words a disturbing whisper that seeped through the glass. "You should have let me in, it's safer inside." His words made no sense, but they sent shivers down my spine. I stayed hidden in the corner of my apartment, phone in one hand, a makeshift weapon in the other. My heart hammered in my chest as I waited for the police. When they finally arrived, They found the man had vanished, leaving no trace behind. It was as if he had never been there. They assured me that they'd searched the area, but I was left to spend the rest of the night in terror, the storm outside mirroring the tempest within me. To this day, I can't forget that chilling encounter, the face pressed against the window, the relentless scratching, the haunting words. I have no idea who that man was or what he wanted, but I'm haunted by the knowledge that, for a brief and terrifying moment, he had been just inches away from me, separated only by a thin sheet of glass. I was walking home one chilly night, the street illuminated only by the soft glow of the streetlights. I'd taken this route countless times, and it was usually uneventful, but this night would be different. The silence around me was broken only by the distant hum of a passing car. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. My steps quickened, and my heart began to race. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but the unease lingered. Turning a corner, I noticed a man, tall and lanky, about half a block behind me. He had his hood up, obscuring most of his face, and he was walking at a hurried pace, eerily matching my steps. Fear coiled in my chest as I picked up my pace, my footsteps echoing in the empty street. The man did the same, drawing closer with every step. Panic set in, and I knew I had to lose him. I turned into a narrow alley, hoping to slip away. But he followed me in, and the confined space felt like a trap closing in. The dim light from the street barely reached here, and I could hardly see his face. My voice trembled as I called out, "Why are you following me?" He didn't answer, his silence an unsettling response. I tried to retrace my steps to get back to the main road, but he blocked my way. There was a chilling smile beneath the hood, one that sent shivers down my spine. The man's movements were deliberate, unhurried, like he was savoring my fear. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling, and dialed 911, hoping that the dispatcher's voice would be my lifeline. But when she answered, I realized I couldn't speak, afraid he would hear and react. Desperation took hold as I turned and ran deeper into the alley. He pursued, his steps echoing mine. I was gasping for breath, my chest tight with fear. The realization hit me that I was alone in the dark with this stranger, and there was no escape. Suddenly, I heard the distant blare of a police siren, a glimmer of hope. The man must have heard it too, because he hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to dart to the side and make a break for it. As I burst out of the alley onto a better lit street, I saw the flashing lights of a patrol car pulling up. Relief washed over me as two officers emerged, responding to my silent 911 call. They detained the man and questioned him. Turned out, he had a history of stalking women in the area, and his intentions that night were far from benign. The police assured me that he would be taken off the streets, and I was grateful for their swift response. I walked home, shaken but safe, knowing that the chilling encounter could have ended far worse. I'd never forget that night, a stark reminder that danger can lurk in the most ordinary places, even on the familiar path home. I'd always enjoyed foraging, and the thrill of scavenging for mushrooms in the moonlight made the risk of the chill night worth it. This particular night, however, would be different in the worst way. As I scoured the forest floor, my trusty flashlight pierced the darkness. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves beneath my feet and the distant hoot of an owl. There was a strange tension in the air, but I ignored it, chalking it up to my imagination. That's when I noticed the faint sound of footsteps nearby. My heart pounded as I froze, shining my light around. There, about 50 feet away, stood a man. He was tall, gaunt, and shrouded in tattered clothes. His eyes gleamed in the weak glow of my flashlight. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice trembling. No response. He just stood there, staring. I began to back away, but I kept my eyes on him. Every time my light dimmed for a moment, he seemed to inch closer, just one unsettling step at a time. Panicking, I picked up my pace, but he maintained the same distance. He didn't say a word, and his expression remained blank, almost void of emotion. With each step I took, the forest felt less like a sanctuary and more like a labyrinth. I wanted to find my way back to the familiar path, back to safety. But every time I looked, he was still there, hauntingly persistent. As I quickened my pace, my flashlight flickered, plunging me into darkness. The rustle of leaves was now a deafening roar, and the distance between me and the man vanished. I could hear his ragged breathing, so close it sent a shiver down my spine. I stumbled, my hands frantically fumbling for my flashlight. When the beam returned, he was inches from my face, his hollow eyes locked onto mine. Time seemed to stand still as I inched backward, praying for an escape. I finally turned and sprinted through the forest, the echo of my frantic footsteps haunting my every step. The chilling knowledge that he was still behind me fueled my desperate escape. After what felt like an eternity, I burst onto the path, my lungs burning with exhaustion. There, in the dim glow of the moonlight, I saw a figure emerge from the forest behind me. But it wasn't the man. It was a park ranger. Gasping for breath, I explained my chilling encounter. They rushed back into the woods to search for the mysterious man, but when they returned, they found nothing. The ranger assured me that I wasn't the first to have such an experience. The area was known for strange occurrences, and they would increase patrols. I thanked them, though their words didn't ease my fears. I've never foraged at night again. That chilling encounter left a permanent mark, a stark reminder that the serene beauty of nature can also hide something far more sinister in the shadows. Driving a taxi at night had always been a mix of monotony and occasional strange encounters. But this one particular night would be etched into my memory forever. It was well past midnight when I picked up two men. They looked odd, dressed in tattered clothing and sporting wild hair. One of them had a twitchy eye, and the other seemed to be muttering to himself. They hopped into the back seat without a word, and I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. "Where to?" I asked. No response, just more muttering and a constant exchange of unsettling glances between the two. I sighed and focused on the road, determined to get them to their destination as quickly as possible. After a few minutes of silence, the muttering stopped, and one of them began to giggle softly. It wasn't the kind of laughter that brought relief, it was eerie and unsettling. His laughter grew louder and more manic, echoing in the confined space of the cab. I glanced in the rearview mirror to see their faces twisted into unnerving grins. My heart raced, and I knew I had to do something. I pulled the cab over to the side of the road. "What's going on? Where do you guys want to go?" I asked, my voice shaky. The man who had been muttering leaned forward, his face inches from mine. "We're just enjoying the ride, my friend," he whispered, his voice dripping with a sinister tone. The other man continued to laugh, the sound growing louder and more disturbing. I could feel my anxiety skyrocketing. Something was seriously wrong with them. My instinct screamed at me to get out of there, to abandon the cab and run for my life. But my fear held me in place. I couldn't just leave my cab. I needed it. As the minutes ticked by, their laughter turned into whispers. It was as if they were conspiring against me, discussing something I couldn't comprehend. Panic welled up inside me, and I reached for my phone, ready to dial 911. But just as I was about to make the call, they fell into an eerie silence. The change was so sudden that it was deafening. I turned to face them, and their unsettling grins had disappeared. Their eyes were fixed on me, cold and emotionless. "Where's your wallet?" The man who had been giggling earlier suddenly asked. The question threw me off. What? Why do you want to know? He leaned in closer, his breath chilling. We just want your wallet. I was trapped, my heart pounding as I reached for my wallet and handed it to him. They snatched it from my hand without a word and examined its contents. Thank you, the other man said, his voice devoid of emotion. With that, they opened the cab door and stepped out onto the dark, empty road. I watched as they disappeared into the night, my wallet clutched in their hands. As soon as they were out of sight, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and sped away from the chilling encounter. The relief that washed over me was immense, but it was tinged with a lingering fear. I knew I had escaped something truly sinister. I reported the incident to the police and described the two men as best I could. They promised to look into it, but deep down, I feared those chilling men would continue their unnerving activities. That night changed me. The monotony of driving a taxi at night would never be the same.